My name's Graham Nichols.
And I'm Mark Bentham.
And I'm Katie Holloway. You're listening to Ordinary. Is it ordinary or ordinary?
That's a great question. I'd never thought about it, but now I am.
Probably if I was talking, I'd say, oh, it's ordinary. But
Ordinary.
whenever I say it on here, I say ordinary.
Whatever it is,
Yes.
ordinary.
It's a bit like controversy.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
controversy. No.
Yes, well, quite.
No one
It's a bit
would
like
say
controversy or controversy.
Controversial.
Yeah.
Yes, but
controversy.
I think it's controversy. Controversy. Controversy is a completely legitimate pronunciation.
Controversy.
Yes.
I would say that, I think.
Yes. BBC pronunciation is controversy.
Look, I'm from Essex, so I have no idea, so I'm not going to
Yeah.
There we go. This is a controversial intro. So, how are you both? Done anything fun lately?
We went to Blackpool last week, Graham and I.
Oh, did you get some rock? Got the
No.
tower?
No,
Go on that roller coaster?
no, that's how boring we are.
I think
Yeah.
we didn't even, unless you did, Mark, get
To the beach.
any closer to the sea than our little Premier Inn was close to the sea. So we didn't go and dip our toe in the water or anything. But yeah,
It was hard work.
it was a conference. Conferences are conferences. They're a funny old thing. Christian conferences. They're a combination of some good Bible teaching, some average Bible teaching. So social contact that's really good, and social contact that's a bit awkward. It's all kind of it's all a right old mix. Christian conference.
Nice to catch up with old friends, new friends.
Yeah,
Oh, nice. Good.
yeah.
Do you wish that it went on forever?
No, it's not heaven.
That was my smooth segue into today's
Is it even
topic.
a glimpse of heaven? Interesting. No.
Yeah,
Is it?
I'm not sure it's a glimpse of heaven. I think church, when it's going really well, is more of
I think that's right.
representative glimpse of heaven. I think conferences are a bunch of people thrown together slightly randomly, but I mean, in a way, it's a foretaste of heaven in that it's people from different places. People from Newcastle right through to I don't know.
Yeah, but
Devon.
in one sense, it's not though, is it? Because it's similar giftings and stuff. So you're kind of getting a load of the hands together that are all a bit slightly different, but they're generally similar giftings. Like so, you haven't got the full range of the body.
I remember the first time I ever went to a Christian conference. I think I was 17. I hadn't been a Christian very long. And we went to Spring Harvest in Skegness, Butlins.
Yeah,
And,
bring it on.
Those were the days. I think it was. Yeah, I'm not going to make a comment on that actually. But I remember then thinking, this is just what heaven's like, because it was just everyone there was a Christian, and it.
I'll tell you what, if
I
heaven
didn't know
is
many
like
Christians.
Butlins, Skegness, then that would be. I'm not sure that would ever be classed as heaven. People, I get that. Butlins, Skegness, definitely not.
Mark was on the edge of
heaven
heresy.
has grown since then.
The fun thing was Mark was on the edge of heresy then, because I think he wanted to say, I don't want to be there.
Oh yeah.
I was going to say that, but I thought that just can't.
You still want to be there,
Yeah, you want to be with Jesus, but I mean, I think Jesus,
even if it's Skegness, but
yeah,
Yes.
those were the days.
Other drab holiday destinations are available.
They are. This was in my head. I believe. I don't know where that is in the country. I couldn't even tell you where Skegness is in the country. I know it took us some hours to drive there.
Yorkshire, northeast-ish.
Oh, is it?
Skegness.
Oh, it was further than
Lincolnshire.
I thought.
Oh, Skegness is Lincolnshire. I'm thinking of Filey,
There's a
which is a bit
beach.
further up in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
It didn't take us that long to get there.
Anyway, talking of taking a long time to get to places,
Yeah, quite.
that's your
God
second
is-
attempt.
nice segue.
Yeah, the second
segue.
segue. We'll get there eventually. God is eternal. That's where we are today. If you're listening as it goes out, this should be the last Friday of the month. But who knows? You're welcome to listen anytime. So we're on an attribute of God, and it is God's eternality. So what do we mean when we say that God is eternal? Nice, easy question to kick us off.
I think it means he doesn't have a beginning and he doesn't have an end. So as Psalm 90 says, he's from everlasting to everlasting. But as I said on the chat we had before we actually started recording, beyond that, it gets a bit harder to be really, really precise. But I think it means that, it doesn't have a beginning, doesn't have an end, doesn't go through moments of time like we do, which are to do with change, aren't they? Time is always to do with change. Yeah. Something changes, a clock ticks, movement happens, something in the universe changes, that defines time. And he's not bound by that.
Yeah.
There could be a better definition, though.
Well, yeah, I think it's also, he's outside of time, isn't it? It's not that he's bound by time. He stands outside of time in that sense. I mean, it's one of his attributes that we're not like. It's the non-communicable or uncommunicable, whatever it is.
I think.
Incommunicable?
Yeah, incommunicable.
Yes. So it's one of those because although we will live for eternity with him, we are not eternal beings in and of ourselves. So I think there's a sense of his eternal is also a sense of his kind of, it's his ability to have, for want of a better word, life without anyone else sustaining him. We are beings who are dependent on. He is non-dependent. It's part of who he is in that sense of different to us and godlike.
Right. Do you want to hear a quote? Louis Berkhoff, he says, "God transcends time and differs from it essentially. God fills time, is in every part of it, but his eternity is not really this being in time. It is rather that to which time forms a contrast."
Yeah, it's a good one.
That's a right mind warp. But,
yeah, I think that I used your expression, Mark, when you said he's outside time. I use that expression, but then I sometimes think, is it quite right? In the sense that he's not bound by time, but he is also inside time as well as outside time. Yeah. Which, that was a helpful quote actually. That he inhabits every space and every time and every moment. I think it is helpful to think about time to do with matter and objects, and so it is really hard, but it is kind of logically makes sense that because God created everything, he has to be out separate from that, essentially separate from that, and time is defined by all the created things, so he's not bound in that sense. So although it is kind of mind-bending, it does logically make sense that you would have a timeless being who creates everything that makes time.
Because
and
God
if he wasn't timed,
time.
If he was timed, then he wouldn't be infinite and he wouldn't be the unique creator. He would have had to have had another cause.
Well, presumably it would mean he couldn't be omnipresent, all-knowing, because he has to be outside to be able to see everything and know everything, isn't it? There's no point where God doesn't see future or past in one sense, which is mind-blowing.
Yes.
How many times will you blow everyone's minds in a half an hour podcast?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, whenever anyone in the Bible talks about it is to help them kind of have a higher view of God rather than to particularly tickle their intellects. But that whole how God sees things is hard as well. In like in Peter, where it says 1,000 years is one day and days like 1,000 years, and that sense that God sort of transcends like he can run along the conveyor belt of time backwards and forwards seamlessly, timelessly, and see it all at the same time. But then history does seem to be at a particular point. And it's not like history is simultaneously at all the points at the same time.
Well,
I think we genuinely are.
But maybe it is to God.
Yeah, but whether it is, that's the bit that I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, I was hoping you would.
No, because although God can see the whole of time and is outside of time, time must be at a particular point. Otherwise, simultaneously, every event in history is happening all at the same time.
Everything would be changing all the time.
Yeah. And
there wouldn't be any order to that, would there? And we know that God is a God of order.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I think the qualifier, isn't it? He acts in time, which means that time is at a particular point. So, however, what we mean by him outside of time is seeing it, there is a sense whereby he is also choosing, because of the way in which he has created, to act in a particular point at a particular time. And he knows where that is going in terms of the future, and he knows where it's gone in terms of the past, but he's not acting in that sense in the past or in the future. He's acting in the moment, as it were, because that's the way he's chosen to create.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Jesus has died on the cross. That has happened.
Yeah.
He will return one day. That hasn't happened, and that is true. Can't believe I'm questioning that is true, but my mind is warped now, and I just needed to check.
Yeah.
And if that was, if God was not acting in time, then we could say, well, that's already happened, but that's not the case, is it?
I don't think Jesus has come back yet. No.
I hope not.
I think
really disappointed.
Jesus encourages us not to think that he's come back if we didn't know. Yeah. I think, Moses and Elijah, you don't know them, but hopefully you will one day. They reappeared, didn't they? Or they appeared in the Transfiguration. And I'm assuming that it wasn't that they became godlike in that they were now outside of time and could just kind of zoom anywhere in the whole of time, space, and just arrive. And
like Flash Gordon.
Not in that way. Flash Gordon. I'm assuming they had some. Yes, it's encouraging. Doctor Who, maybe you can just about manage that one.
I know who that is.
Yeah. I'm assuming they had some kind of spirit experience, having died, and died in their cases in particular ways. Maybe that's significant. I don't know. In the way that God buried them and God takes Elijah. But anyway, I'm assuming they existed and then they kind of lived outside of this world, but they existed outside this world. And then it comes a point in time where the transfiguration happens when they are reintroduced to this world, but they haven't had a godlike existence in the meantime. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What was that time travel?
No. That's the point. I think they weren't doing time travel. I think
they weren't. But it would have been God would have been coordinating it. So
you don't think Moses is living, he suddenly flash forwards in time to the point of the Transfiguration, then flashes back in time and tells Aaron, his brother, over dinner that night that he'd gone forward in time to thing and caught up with a bloke called Elijah who he'd never met before.
Yes, I think precisely not. I think they arrived at a point in time because I think our experience will continue to be timed, even though a spiritual experience. I think we'll be like the angels in that time before we're resurrected bodies. In heaven, and then we will experience time in terms of a sequence of events in eternity. So by definition, in the bit in between, we're not suddenly in some different experience. Yeah. And other things I don't know.
Humans, as I was prepping this, it did really strike me how bound by time we are. Like, we mark everything by time. Like, what time is it? And, already my kids are saying, how many sleep is it till Christmas? Like
41.
Is it? Mark is the one.
And we got Christmas in the podcast yet again. Bingo.
Did. Oh, let me just have a sip of my drink from my mug.
Nice.
I can't remember what's on that bingo card, but if anyone is playing, we might get there. I think I mentioned my kids as well. We're getting there. Like that, we are so bound by time that, like, we wrap our whole lives around it. Like, does God do that? He's obviously not bound by it, but he does. I don't know. Is God anticipating things, counting down till Christmas or just anything, or the Judgment Day? Like, is he marking that off on his calendar, or is he just operating differently?
Yes. No.
Yes. No. This is
as in. But when you look at 2 Peter 3, which Graham quoted earlier, in the sense of, a day is like 1,000 years for the Lord. So there's obviously a difference, isn't there, in terms of how he sees it, and yet he's also chosen to create in such a way that days, sun, moon, seasons all exist. Therefore, he is allowed that process, and therefore he has determined a date, I take it, in the future from what you get in Scripture, which no one knows outside of him, whereby Jesus will return. Now, whether that's the year 2023 or the year 2223, we don't know, but he knows, and he's marked that date, which I take it in one sense will be humanly, we can name it as the day the world ended. Here's the date, the end of the year. But in terms of how God thinks, he's one level outside of that and one level inside of that. So 1,000 years to him, but actually for us it still feels the seasons, which if Jesus was living still on earth, he would experience that reality as well.
Is Jesus eternal?
Yes.
Yes.
In his divine nature.
So God the Son is obviously eternal, but can we say that Jesus is eternal?
Yes.
We can.
In his divine nature.
But Jesus didn't always exist as a human. Like, he was begotten and born.
Sure.
So he had Jesus had a beginning. I'm not saying God the Son had a beginning, but Jesus, the man, had a beginning.
Well, I think you have to be careful there, because what you're intimating in question is therefore that God the Son is so changed at that point that suddenly how he becomes something different.
Yeah.
Whereas actually Scripture talks of God the Son, and he takes on another nature, but person. He doesn't lose anything. So there's no change in fundamentally, because otherwise you're kind of talking, here was God the Son pre-incarnation, God the Son, well, we don't know who he is, and then suddenly he becomes something different. I don't think that's how Scripture teaches. So in one sense, Jesus has always existed. We didn't know his name, per se, you could say, or the way in which that was related, and he took on human nature at that point in the personhood that we know as Jesus, and he is an eternal being in the sense of he is fully God. And one of the attributes of God is that he's eternal. So therefore, in that sense, Jesus is an eternal being.
Yeah, I'm just wrapping my head around it, just catching up with the old. Yeah, I think I'm there. Okay. Humans then, like, we are all products of the time that we're born in, right? So like, we're different. Like, I will do some things because I'm a millennial. For instance, I don't have a TV license and don't watch live TV. So Graham would tell me that's because I'm a millennial. You've definitely said that before.
Yeah.
Probably on the podcast. So we're all we do certain things because of the time we were born, but God's not like that. Because he's outside of time, didn't have a beginning. So what's the significance of that? The fact that he's not altered by just time, I guess.
Well, I think it connects with the unchangeableness of God, which we have done, maybe? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think so.
Already. Because time is to do with change. And pastorally, personally, it has significance, doesn't it? Because it means God can be relied on, that God is solid, God is consistent, and God will not be bowled over by some event that bowls us over. And so, yeah, and he's not a product of sort of time and fashion. So you are less likely to have a TV license, but not because you're a millennial as such, but more because you're born in a time where all your peer group are doing similar things to that, and the options and availability and everything else has changed. So we're all products of our time.
Maybe the funny thing is that you still do have a TV license. Maybe that's the odd thing, because you've always had one.
Yeah. There are other reasons which have some merit, but we won't get into that. But it's not because I've eternally had a TV license
since before the world began,
or I'm trying to sort of maintain some things. Yeah, I mean there are logical reasons for doing things, and there are trend reasons for doing things.
Yeah.
I named one of my daughters Charlotte, and you think you're being original, and then you discover loads of other people are.
Yeah.
One of my children, sorry, Charlotte, and so forth. So there are all those things, fashions, groupthink, all those things that God is not prone to. There's an independence about him, which is something to worship him for, and something to be solid and relied upon, because there may be a great reason for having a TV license or not, or there may just be a fashion reason for having it or not. And we know with God there's always a good reason, and not a peer group pressure reason, not a time and space reason for him being anything that he is, and that he will still be that consistently when we get to experience him in person in what we sometimes call eternity.
Great. Is it time for another quote?
Yeah.
And Graham's light to stop flashing.
I know, it's really distracting me, that.
Oh, is it flashing?
Yeah, you're going from nice colour to a warm colour to...
I don't know why.
All right,
Okay.
Now's not the time. We'll put up with it.
Yeah, I'll try and deal with it.
So in her book about the attributes of God, Jem Wilkin writes, "He is simultaneously the God of the past, present and future, bending time to his perfect will, unfettered by its constraints. The past holds for him no missed opportunity. The present holds for him no anxiety. The future holds for him no uncertainty. He was and is to come." I just thought that was really encouraging, to think these are the implications of God being outside of time, and within inside it as well. So how can we be comforted and encouraged by the fact that God is not only unrestrained by time, but also is in control of time?
It goes to his sovereignty, doesn't it? He's Lord of time and sovereignty, and therefore nothing happens outside of who he is. Therefore, there's a comfort in that, isn't there? That the one who is in control of even the time, the stage, what happens, etc. But in one sense, this then ties to all his other attributes as well, doesn't it? Honor on its own, it's because he's unchanging, because he's outside of time, because he controls time. But related to that is because he is loving and good and faithful and, all-knowing and all-knowledgeable. Because of all those things are true, that I can trust that he is at work. And because I can trust he's at work, because I know he has the power to control and make all things happen in time. So they connect to his attributes, which is what we'd call the doctrine of simplicity, which is this idea that at the end of the day, God is fully each of his attributes all of the time. If you isolate one and just make him, this is all he is about, it kind of misrepresents him. So they intimately connect how he then works it out. But because he's in time, it means that because he's Lord of time, it means that he's sovereign over all things. I can rest in his assurance of his control of what is happening.
I think Ecclesiastes 3 is really helpful, which Mark preached on a few years ago, I believe, where it says there's a time for everything. And it's the really famous bit: time to plant, time to uproot, time to all that king, time for war, time for peace. And people often use it as, now you've got a light problem.
I know. Is it in my eyes or making me glow?
Yeah. The people often use that, which is not completely illegitimate, to make the point that there are different times and seasons, and a right time to do things and a wrong time to do things. But that's not really the point. I think Mark, helpfully, when he preached it, made the point that it speaks to the fact that in terms of our experience, things are always changing, things are always different, and there's a repetition, but a change and an unpredictability about it. And it goes on to say the famous verse, he's made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. So in terms of our response to it, I think we kind of want to grasp it. I think the idea of setting eternity in our hearts is that we do have a sense of the eternal God. I think that's partly what he says when he says we set eternity in our hearts. But I think we do have a sense that we are created to live on. So I think that's in our hearts as well. We can perceive that we're supposed to live on, we're not supposed to die. So although I don't think we have a perception that we've always lived and we're, experiencing some kind of karma or something, some reincarnation. I don't think we have that sense. I do think we have a sense going forward that we will always live. There will always be some conscious existence. But I love the way the verse ends because it says, no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end, which kind of makes me think, no, I can't really figure it out. I've just got a sense of it. And then you need the rest of the Bible to kind of direct you towards this God who's from everlasting to everlasting and explain to you the bits you can understand.
Yeah. How does God's eternality help us when we're struggling with feeling like our prayers are not being answered, or you pray and pray for something and it's not happened yet? How does that help with that kind of experience?
Because you trust the one who sees all things, who's outside of time and knows all things.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it helps in that sense, is because I'm not praying to someone who can't do anything. I'm praying to the one who can see it all and knows it all, and who has the best view on it. Keller says about prayer, if we knew everything that God does and sees everything that God sees, we would always be happy with how God answered our prayers, or we'd want God to answer in that way as well. So I think, that's where trust, it works itself out.
Yeah. And it's that idea that God knows the end from the beginning, whereas we only know the beginning or we know the middle, and we haven't got to the end. What in a sense, whatever we're talking about, we've never got to the end. Whereas he sees where all the threads tie up and justice is served and God's people are vindicated, and he sees all the end of that, whereas we can't see that, so we can't figure out how it all threads together.
Yeah, but we can trust him because he does know. Yeah. So what happens kind of in us, in our beliefs, in our actions, when we forget that God is eternal, or maybe when we forget that we are not eternal? What are some kind of things when we that can trip us up there?
I think sometimes we can humanize God to an unhelpful point. Obviously, Jesus Christ is a human being and experiences all those things. But when we humanize God to the point of saying he's changeable like us, or he is confused by circumstances, or surprised by circumstances, or perplexed in a way that's not biblical, I think the idea of God grieving over certain things and so forth is a biblical idea, but I think we only go as far as that and don't kind of take it further to attributing all kinds of emotions of surprise and joy and delight in any categories that are to do with things changing over time, and not the categories that the Bible gives us for God delighting or grieving or doing all those things. And so I think humanizing God is a failure sometimes, and humanizing in the sense of putting him in time can sometimes lead us to a lower view of God, not such a high view, not such a view that will cause us to worship and trust.
Which then spins off into that, which means I start to think I am God. Yeah. So, if I forget that God is eternal and the one who is, and I'm not, it'll either make me exceptionally anxious because I can't control it, or I'll become a complete control freak and try to control everything, striving to, make it all happen rather than resting and trusting in the one who does and working. And of course, there's a balance, isn't there? When I pray, there's a sense of I'm called to act, but sometimes I overact because I think I'm godlike and I'm trying to make it all work, or I just give up in fear and anxiety and worry.
God. Or the other side could be just chronic laziness, just thinking I've got all the time in the world, keep procrastinating. Maybe a lack of urgency in evangelism. And I guess we all teeter from one end of this to the other most days. I don't think there's probably ever a day when I get it right.
No, it's a good point, though, in the sense that although God's outside of time, God places us inside time and gives us responsibilities in time. And there's that whole idea of redeeming the time in evangelism, but also in terms of work and other things, being diligent, always working today, for what should be done today, always having in mind today. So although we see eternity and we see the bigger picture, we also make sure we're responsible in the moment now. So yeah, it's a good thing to.
And the flip side to all that, of course, is if I forget that there's an eternity, then I live as if today is all there is.
Yeah.
So then, the unbeliever who just lives, or even the believer, you start living as if this world is all there is. This time is all I have. Therefore, I'm going to make the most of it, do what I want, live how I want, party as hard as I want. And for some, it goes the other way. They get completely depressed, weighed down, bowed down, because they think this is all there is and this life has not gone particularly well for them, and it's just been hard, or for whatever reason, life is hard, and they give up because you've forgotten the eternal perspective.
Yeah, holding it all in tension. So how does the Bible give us any principles then on how we can live wisely as creatures within time? I guess we just touched on some of them.
Yeah, I mean, we connect with a God who's eternal. So I think the Psalms and other places that talk about God being from everlasting to everlasting, and the fact that God reveals himself as the I am, who is completely self-existent, is, as I said earlier, not so much to stimulate our intellects, but to cause us to worship and to have a sense of trust, because he's outside of those things. So I think that's a real biblical idea, that whenever the Bible talks about God being from everlasting, it's to provoke worship in us and trust in us. It's not to just kind of say, wow, that's amazing, in as a concept, or wow, I can or I can't get my head around it, or I've got this brilliant theory about, what's it like for God. It's always to make us think this is okay, because you're, underneath you are the everlasting arms. The God who's from everlasting to everlasting is the one who's going to take care of you. He's going to be, as Mark was preaching about recently, your strength and refuge, and you can completely trust in him. So I think it should always take us to worship more than anything else. Certainly not to wild speculation.
But off that, as I worship, it reminds me I'm a creature who is constrained by time, which means that I then need to respond to how the Lord has called me to, which means I'm not eternal. I need rest. I need to sleep. I can only do so much in a day. I can't do everything. So I've got to be realistic and do that which the Lord has commanded me: love him, love people, respond to him in right and appropriate ways, recognizing that we are constrained. We're not eternal beings, unlike him. Therefore, we're dependent on him.
Right. I think that's a good place to end. If you are listening and you've not listened to our all the other podcasts about God's attributes,
what have you been doing?
Yeah, what have you been doing? Where have you been? You haven't got endless time. Go back and listen to them. Roughly once a month, we've picked one of God's attributes and kind of unpacked it a bit, and they're my favourite episodes of the month. I think so. Do go back and listen to some of them. And we'll see you next time when we are dipping our toe into Christmas officially. See you then. You've been listening to Ordinary, the podcast seeking to help ordinary Christians live for Christ in everyday life. If you found this helpful, please do share with a friend. Come and find us on social media. We'd love to have you join our conversations. You can find us on Twitter @OrdinaryCCHH, on Instagram @OfficialOrdinaryPodcast, and on YouTube @OrdPod, that's ORDPOD. Or you can email your comments or questions to ordinary@cchh.org.uk. We'll see you next time.